Chapter 14 The Darkest Hour. Our team arrived in Hiroshima at the tail end of summer. By then, the Soviet Union's cards were all on the table. They were preparing to encircle the city and besiege it. Thousands of men and vehicles were coming ashore at Obama and Totori, while a naval blockade was taking shape in the Seto Inland Sea. The encirclement took so long that our unit, the 13th Artillery, was able to enter the city via the main highway without being molested. "I don't get it," Azuna Tachibana said. "Why not just storm the city with all those men?" Our team was crammed into the back of a 2-ton transport truck. The canvas top was down, and the hot summer air whipped past us, along with the mountainous terrain that made up Hiroshima Prefecture. It was such a tight fit back there that my girlfriend Chiho had to sit in my lap to make room for other soldiers. Jake Green shot me a look of pure jealousy before he replied to Asuna's question. "It looks like they're gonna try and force a surrender," he explained. "They don't want to fight in a dense urban neighborhood any more than we do." "He's right," Kotori Sato piped up. She was squeezed between Yutaka Yamamoto and Nanako Yamada. The paradox. "My friends and I helped out the resistance in Sapporo for a couple of years before we were transferred to Honshu. Cities are death traps for armies. There are so many hiding spaces for people and bombs and ambushes." "You were born in Sapporo?" Nanako asked, raising her eyebrows at Kotori. Kotori nodded. "Most of my family is still there," she said. "I don't know how I'm going to find Mom and Dad again when this is all over. For all I know, they might be in some Soviet gulag somewhere." "Don't worry," Aaron Ray assured her. "Once we push the Russians out of here, we'll keep pushing them all the way to Moscow. We'll find your folks." I'm fairly confident that Aaron and Kotori had a few conversations before this, but this is the earliest one my wife and I can remember with certainty. They would become the parents of our savior, Jericho, just 2 short years after this moment. Regardless, this is the point when our convoy reached the crest of the final hill and started driving down into the Ota River Delta. Before reaching the sea, the Ota River broke up into 6 smaller tributaries, each going their own way to shore, creating a very flat, fan-shaped region. It was atop all of this that the city of Hiroshima was built. It was an absolutely huge city, a mega metropolis, having grown large enough to swallow up a few of the outlying towns and suburbs. A handful of skyscrapers jutted out from the skyline, while thousands of smaller buildings were crammed next to one another, while narrow streets snaked their way through canyons of concrete. A veritable web of power lines and cables crisscrossed the city, obscuring our view of the many parks that dotted the landscape. A samurai-era castle rose above the tops of many buildings to dominate the northern skyline, and a colorful shopping district lit up the southern half. "Not gonna lie, Princess," Mateo said. "I can totally see why your folks came down here. This place is beautiful." "It's also full of history," Aaron chimed in. "This city is over 400 years old. So much has happened here." We spent most of the drive into town receiving a history lesson about Hiroshima from Aaron, who knew more about history than anyone else. Even our Japanese comrades were shocked when Aaron repeated trivia about the Asano, a samurai clan who once ruled over this region. Aaron also revealed that he learned how to speak Japanese and could hold a conversation with our local comrades in their own language. Yukiko Takahashi was giving Aaron a disapproving look, while Kotori Sato hung on his every word, clearly impressed. My wife later told me that it was extremely uncommon for a foreigner to have such detailed knowledge of Japanese history and culture. July 16th, 2012. Kabe High School, Asakita Ward. The city of Hiroshima is divided into 8 wards, and Asakita is the northernmost. At some point before we actually showed up, General Laura Harper decided that this would be where the 13th Artillery put down roots. We set up our cannons in the recreation field outside of a high school. We tore down the fences, separating the baseball, football, and tennis areas from one another, and soon had 3 rows of howitzers set up, complete with lanes wide enough for vehicles to bring ammo. It was clear at a glance why Harper wanted us here. The school was positioned on top of a hill. "Just look around!" Holly Smith gasped as we all stood on the roof of Kabe High School and took in the view. "We can see for miles and miles." "If the sun came out, we might be able to see Seto from here," Chihiro Iwasaki commented, referring to the inland sea. "Captain Smith," Aaron said, "if you want to fight here, this is such lovely ground." "Lovely," Holly repeated. "This is more than lovely, Ray. This is damn good ground." A lot of history books out there say that the siege of Hiroshima went from December 6th until the war ended on December 22nd. Those dates are not accurate. From what I can remember, the battle really started on July 16th, the same day when our artillery unit showed up and started shooting. But yes, we really did keep fighting right up until the December 22nd ceasefire. We took over the Kabe High School and turned it into our base. There were enough rooms in the building for all 300 soldiers in the 13th Artillery to sleep comfortably. We even gave Chiho her own room. She didn't want it, but she was pretty much forced to accept. By now, word of her true identity had somehow leaked, and all of the Japanese soldiers in our unit were loudly demanding that we show her proper respect. So, Chiho got her own room, and 4 soldiers volunteered to guard it around the clock, much to my frustration and hers. We hadn't seen one another in years and desperately wanted some time alone. Once our unit got established, we crewed all of our 155mm cannons and announced ourselves to the Russians, in a very lethal way. The fight for Hiroshima was on. Holly Smith was in her element. She reveled in planning our defense of the area and was very thorough in her work. She crafted a defense in-depth system around our base that made the best use of our artillery pieces. It was a multi-layered kill zone manned by Allied soldiers at all times. When the Russians started coming down the mountain towards Hiroshima, the bodies began piling up in earnest. Before the first week was out, everyone in Holly's command had at least one red star painted on their helmets. Others had dozens. Jake Green tried to return to his old job as cook, but the soldiers of the 13th issued a hard vote of no confidence in his meals, nicknaming him Soylent Green after just a few servings. Jake was issued a sniper rifle and ordered to patrol the kill zone perimeter with Chihiro Iwasaki. In all fairness, Jake seemed to like getting away from the kitchen. He preferred having the chance to chat up girls, and Iwasaki did say she felt safer with a big guy like Jake around. Sometime in late summer, Jake gunned down 8 Russians who tried to breach our perimeter in less than 2 minutes. The other Australian soldiers were so impressed that they gave him more and more beer until he agreed to get a Maori-style warrior tattoo on his face. Australians are weird. Matteo taught myself and several members of our team how to load, aim, and fire the 155mm howitzer. It turned out to be a shockingly simple process, and with little practice, we were hitting T-90s and Biryusas from over 10 miles away, much to the enemy's growing frustration. Meanwhile, Akaya Ogawa was removed from combat duty. Something in her mind just seemed to snap after the battles of Obama. She would remain in a hospital throughout the siege of Hiroshima and would make only a partial recovery. Akaya would remain eccentric and prone to crazy, off-the-cuff statements for the rest of her life, but she did recover enough to lead a mostly normal existence. Akaya even became a prominent UN lawmaker in the aftermath of the Second Hyperspace War. Her political career ended with her own assassination on the front steps of the Reichstag on April 13, 2076, a mystery that remains unsolved to this very day. One person who did remain with us was Tsubaki Endo. She latched onto Chiho and I and refused to let go. She traveled everywhere with us, on patrols, running messages to Captain Smith, keeping watch from the roof. She took anything either of us said to be gospel, and looked up at us like we were the second coming of Christ. Shiho and I were both very uncomfortable with having Tsubaki tail us at all times, as she single-handedly derailed all of our attempts and plans to spend some time alone together. Because Tsubaki was with us, Chiho and I turned ourselves into a sniper team, mostly to keep the little girl away from frontline combat. Chiho borrowed Chihiro's rifle whenever the latter wasn't on duty, and I used a pair of binoculars to act as her spotter. We worked well together, and Chiho herself turned out to be a very good crack shot. Sometimes we would spend up to 12 hours on top of buildings in northern Hiroshima, harassing the Soviets as they came down the mountain roads into town. Tsubaki also tried to be a spotter, but she proved to be just a little scatterbrained, like most 13-year-olds. Unexpectedly, Kotori Sato and Asuna Tachibana took a liking to Hal McIntosh and Aaron Ray. Both men were quick to befriend the young women. Kotori and Aaron spent a lot of their downtime together, and it wasn't long before the rest of us started suspecting there was something going on between them. Asuna eventually voiced what we were all thinking when she publicly called "Dibs on Ray if he and Tori-chan doesn't work out." The unlikely group of friends would often go out on combat patrols together in the daytime and hang out together at night as well. They shared food, ammunition, and stories, becoming a mini-squad within our team. Kate Newberry was having fun in her own way. She, like everyone else, noticed that Soylent Green was rather girl-crazy, and I think she was intentionally pushing his buttons, flirting with him whenever she got the chance. She must not have minded Soylent's flirtatious and non-committal personality, because I'm convinced Kate was fully aware of the fact that Soylent was sleeping with Chihiro Iwasaki and Holly Smith on the nights he wasn't sleeping with her. As for the paradox, I didn't see much of Nanako Yamada for the first few weeks in Hiroshima. To be fair, I had no idea who Akira was back then. Fortunately, Christopher Wright succeeded in tracking Akira's movements at the time. As I said many chapters ago, the Soviet Red Army kept good record of their activities during this time period. And for Chris, those records proved invaluable. During the encirclement of Hiroshima, the enemy appears to have suffered a number of unexpected setbacks. Vehicles were sabotaged, and train tracks were damaged to the point of being useless. The Soviet chain of command was also disrupted when several officers who could be considered architects of the siege were killed by sniper fire. Also, from September to December, a handful of Soviet cargo planes were shot down by an aircraft that was never identified. They were all carrying fuel and ammunition critical for the planned attack on Hiroshima. Chris is confident that all of these setbacks can be attributed to Akira herself. It would have been in her interest to defang the Soviet attackers as much as possible. She was being very heavy-handed in ensuring this battle went according to her plan. In fact, she is most likely the one who encouraged Yutaka Yamamoto and Yukiko Takahashi to make their move while Chiho and I were gone. Chiho always knew that she would eventually have to face her family and face the consequences of running away from home and joining the military illegally. She always intended to do so on her own time and terms, but sometimes reality just doesn't cooperate. Somebody forced her hand. We're not sure who did it, but I personally suspect the Paradox was trying to hurry things along. A Japanese government official showed up at our base one day in the middle of autumn. We assumed he was bringing word about our next resupply convoy, or wanted to survey the damage from our most recent fight with the enemy. But he made a direct beeline for Chiho and handed her a letter. She read it over once and whimpered. "Someone told," she cried. "Mom and Dad know I'm here." The note was written in Prince Ryobe's handwriting. It was short and to the point. "Come to us, or we will come to you. Ten Motomachi, Naka Ward, Hiroshima. Leave the gaijin outside." Chiho burst into tears and ran away before I could ask what was wrong. She dropped the note on the ground as she rounded a corner and vanished into one of the school's labyrinthine passageways. Yutaka Yamamoto picked it up and read it through once before looking up at me. "You should say your goodbyes," he said. "I'm quite confident the two of you are about to see the last of one another." November 9th, 2012. Prefectural Government Building, Naka Ward. The city of Hiroshima is also the capital of its prefecture. So naturally, there was a very large government building in Naka Ward, right at the very center of the city. This structure is where the Japanese government relocated to following their departure from Tokyo, and it was where Chiho and I found ourselves on that cold autumn morning 3 days after the U.S. presidential election. We were flown into town via military helicopter, which landed on the roof of the hospital next door. And then we walked across the street to Chiho's date with Destiny. Standing underneath the trees outside the entrance, Chiho and I hesitated together, surrounded by falling leaves. "They're gonna be angry," Chiho admitted. "I'm in so much trouble, you can't imagine." "I'm just sorry I can't go in there with you," I said. "You shouldn't have to do this alone." Chiho leaned on my shoulder and sighed. "I know I don't say it a lot," she told me, "but I'm really happy and grateful you came looking for me. I was kind of scared you wouldn't, like me anymore. Just when we were really starting to become a couple, too." "Yeah, I was scared too," I admitted. "I was worried that I'd find you and you'd be, well, like a shell of what you used to be. I was scared that the war was going to change you." Chiho let out a sarcastic giggle. "So if you had your way, you'd force me to stay the same person I was when we met?" "God, that makes me an asshole, doesn't it?" I replied. Yes, it does." We both laughed. "Truth is," I told her, "I loved every moment I got to spend with you, and I always looked forward to the next one. I was scared, yeah. Scared that something might stop us from having any more time together." "Sounds like you love me," Chiho teased. "I'm not complaining, though." "Yeah, I do," I confessed. "And I'll love you if your name is Asami or Chiho or something else. No matter who or what you become, I'll be there for you." I grabbed her hand, and she squeezed mine back. We didn't share any more words. We just stood there, holding each other as the last red and orange leaves tumbled to the ground, making it look as though we were standing atop a sea of fire. Finally, Chiho tilted her head, looked over my shoulder, and breathed, "Oh, God, they're watching." 4 figures were standing in an office window. Even though I couldn't see their expressions, I knew we were being monitored, and the princess was being judged very harshly. In Japan, there are taboos against public displays of affection. It simply wasn't acceptable for a couple like us to embrace so intimately in a place where everyone could see us. With more than 50 years' worth of hindsight, my wife and I are certain that being caught in the act of hugging a foreigner on the sidewalk was what sealed her fate. In fact, Nakagawa probably mentioned me in his note with an ulterior motive. He most likely wanted his fellow government officials to witness Chiho's final transgression before she turned herself in. Well, you can't say we didn't give them a show. Princess Asami let go of me and started walking towards the prefectural government building. "Wait for me. I'll come back," she said. "If you don't, I'll hunt you down all over again," I warned her with a smile. Kabe High School, Asakita Ward. Meanwhile, one of the most crucial turning points of our lives was going on back at the school. While neither my wife and I were there to witness it, we were good friends with somebody who was. And he was kind enough to tell us his story before he passed away. Jake Soylent Green couldn't sleep. He was trying to get some shut-eye during the afternoon so he could do a nighttime combat patrol. Soylent was wrapped up in a sleeping bag in one of the old classrooms on the top floor. Kate Newbury was lying next to him in the same sleeping bag, her clothes strewn about the room in a random kind of way, as though she'd been desperate to get rid of them. She was also getting some much-needed rest following the vigorous activities she'd been doing with Soylent. Despite feeling worn out, Soylent was being kept awake by the sound of voices on the roof. It sounded like two people were having a radio conversation in Japanese. Soylent tried putting a pillow over his head, but it was no good. The chatter was continuous and incessant. In the end, Soylent's efforts to get some sleep was not thwarted by some noise on the roof, but rather someone opening the door and coming into the classroom. Nanako Yamada, Akira Robinson, burst into a fit of giggles when she saw the aftermath of Soylent and Kate's joint exercise. Then she saw Soylent was awake and pointed to the ceiling. "Can you ask them to shut up?" Nanako asked. "Some of us late shifters are trying to sleep. I tried, but they shouted at me and told me to go away." In the early 2040s, I talked to Yukiko Takahashi about this. She claims that Nanako Yamada never came up to the roof. The paradox was telling a lie to get Soylent to confront Yukiko and her co-confederate. Grumbling angrily, Soylent threw on his Australian Army uniform and started trudging up the stairs. On the roof, he found Yutaka Yamamoto and Yukiko Takahashi. They had borrowed my 60-foot antenna again and had it wired up to a high-frequency radio, which was set up on a folding table. A portable gas-powered generator was running on the far end of the roof, belching brownish smoke into the air. Both soldiers looked up at Soylent as he approached. "What the bloody hell is all this racket?" Soylent demanded. "And what are you doing up here?" Yukiko and Yutaka looked at one another as though trying to figure out what to do or say. Finally, Yukiko came up with an idea and nudged Yutaka to play along. Decades later, Yukiko told me that she was hiding the radio's hand mic behind her back and was holding the talk button down with one hand, allowing her Soviet co-conspirators to hear everything that happened. "Well, you see, Green," Yukiko spoke slowly, changing her posture and tone of voice to something suggestive. "Yamamoto and I noticed you've got quite the taste in women. We were talking about how we thought you could do so much better than that American bimbo Newbury." With her free hand, she undid the top buttons of her blouse and threw her messy brown hair out of her eyes. Soylent wasn't looking Yukiko in the face anymore. "And we'd finished sending our report to Captain Smith, so I was just, chatting up some of my girlfriends from another unit, talking about you." "Girlfriends?" Soylent repeated. "We talking about the hot ones or the cute ones?" Now, my friend was not dumb. He knew he'd just stumbled across these two doing something very suspicious. That was my antenna, and he knew they didn't have permission to use it. He also knew that Yukiko had not sent a report to Captain Smith via high-frequency radio because Captain Smith strongly preferred to use her cell phone instead, and Smith almost certainly would have given her number to Yukiko by now. Soylent was playing dumb, stalling for time while he figured out what to do. He had no idea who Yukiko was really talking to, and he also had no idea if either she or Yutaka were armed. So, he just made up a plan as he went along. "Oh, a little of both," Yukiko said as she relaxed a little, as did Yutaka. Then she added, "So, you admit you prefer girls like me?" "Oh, Sheila, I'm a simple man." Soylent tried to make himself seem just as relaxed. "The big man upstairs says I can't have all you beautiful gals all to myself, so I gotta pick the best of the bunch instead." "A real shame," Yukiko said, "especially when so many girls where I'm from are drop-dead gorgeous." Where'd you say you were from again? Soylent took a surreptitious step back. Maybe I'll come visit after the war, leave you darlings with a few broken hearts. Yukiko shot a devious smile at Yutaka. Who said anything about after the war? She replied. The People's Republic is only about 50 kilometers north of here. Soylent stopped in his tracks. The People's Republic? Salvation, Yutaka said. It's our way out. Yutaka pulled a handgun from his vest and tossed it onto the table, just out of reach from himself, Yukiko, and Soylent. He clapped his hands and raised them in a frustrated kind of way. I'm tired, Green. I'm sick and tired of fighting all the time, of living in one abandoned building after another, eating military goop and worrying about getting killed every other day. All this fighting for a government that's failed us so badly, fighting for a government that doesn't deserve our loyalty or respect. No, I want out. She wants out. Why not you? It's safe over in the PR, Yukiko added. No bombings or commando raids in the middle of the night. Everyone has plenty to eat or drink, and women outnumber men almost 3-1. When Soylent relayed this story to us years later, my wife and I swore a solemn oath to never make any kind of gamble or wager with him, because he maintained the straightest poker face as he replied, They do now? Have you ever heard of state-sponsored migration? Yukiko said. It's something communist countries do in times like this. Sometimes, Yutaka added, the state deems it necessary for large numbers of people to pack up and move somewhere else. The state makes this happen by any means possible. There aren't enough men in the People's Republic right now, Yukiko said. If you and Yutaka offered them something worth their time, the rewards, well... Yukiko stepped over to Soylent and brushed his face with her hand, making sure to caress his Mori tattoo. Inwardly, Soylent wondered just how long these two had been on the enemy payroll. They were spouting actual communist propaganda, so they had clearly turned some time ago. Wouldn't you want to live in a country that gives you a house, food, and more women than you'd ever know what to do with? My friend can help you there, Yukiko asked. So what she look like? Soylent cut off her train of thought. Huh? Your friend, Soylent clarified. Got a picture? He was trying to stall. This whole time, Soylent had slowly backed toward the chest-high wall at the end of the roof and put his back to it. He was pretending to lean back and relax, but Soylent had actually jammed his hand into his left pocket and was very slowly typing out a message on his smartphone. He distracted Yukiko and Yutaka by pretending to respond to her flirting and going along with their treasonous idea. You want to see what Natasha looks like? Yukiko laughed. Sure, Soylent replied, and then, thinking quickly, he said his personal phone number out loud. He knew this would be a long shot. You barely heard her name, and you want to put the moves on her? Yutaka shook his head and chuckled. You hardly surprise me, Green. It worked. Soylent's phone buzzed and let out a chime sound. Glad to have an excuse, Soylent pulled his smartphone out of his pocket and looked at the screen. The image of a barely clothed Russian woman appeared in his inbox. Soylent quickly swept the image aside with his thumb, and in a matter of seconds, he finished typing out a single message, addressed to Holly Smith, Aaron Ray, Kotori Sato, Nanako Yamata, Mateo Hernandez, Hal McIntosh, and myself. Yuta and Yuki are TR8OR. Talkin' to enemy. Then Soylent pulled the image back on screen, turned his phone to show it to the two traders, and said, God damn, Takahashi, she's a right looker. Got any more? Yukiko and Yutaka both laughed. Since when were you picky green? Yutaka said, giving the Australian a playful smack on the shoulder. Didn't you just hear me? Soylent strained to keep his voice lecherous. I only want the hottest Sheilas. Who else you got? Yukiko returned to the table and put down the radio's microphone, using both hands to send a message on her own phone. Decades later, Yukiko told me that she was simultaneously trying to get more pictures of Russian women and stop her KGB handler from having a panic attack. Soylent kept Yutaka busy by quickly sending pictures of his latest sexual conquests to Yutaka's phone. While Yutaka looked over a nude image of Kate Newbury, Soylent clutched his own smartphone tightly as it vibrated. He stole a quick glance at the reply from Holly Smith. Ack. We are coming. W/guns. Stall. Soylent re-engaged the traders in conversation. Why didn't you go over to the PR when this was all starting? Soylent asked. Why stick around? The People's Republic won't let any old man cross their lines for no reason, Yutaka chuckled. They'll only take you in if you bring something valuable with you. A Korean pilot defected last year, Yukiko said. He flew his plane right into Sapporo and landed. In return for the plane, he got 5 million rubles. They'll take intelligence, too, and that's what we're offering. Soylent felt his blood run cold. Suddenly, it all made sense. Yutaka and Yukiko had bought their way into the People's Republic by selling out the 13th Artillery. By now, the enemy knew exactly what kind of weapons we had, and they also knew the identities of its membership. Then the tables turned. There was a clatter of noise from the stairway, and then the roof access door slammed open. Holly Smith and Nanako Yamada pointed their weapons at the traders, while Hal McIntosh and Aaron Ray ran to the radio and disabled it. Kotori could have shut off the power generator with the flip of a switch, but she chose to blast it with a shotgun instead. Then Holly said, I would bloody love to blow your feckin' brains out, Takahashi. But Command says we've got to take you alive. You've got some questions to answer. An evil smirk crossed Yukiko's features. Prefectural Government Building, Naka Ward. Princess Asami stood alone in the center of a large room while 5 men were seated at a high table looking down at her. The Emperor of Japan, the Crown Prince, Prime Minister Ryo Nakagawa, and the leaders of both houses of the National Diet, the House of Councilors and the House of Representatives. Even though she was just 16, Asami had been to enough political events with the imperial family to know that this was going to be a ceremonial formality, and that any attempted defense would only dig a deeper grave. The Emperor looked down at his niece in such a stern way that she became hyper-conscious of the fact that her military uniform had blood, sweat, and mud from the last 3 months of battle on it. Her hair, while tied up in her preferred hairstyle, braided pigtails, looked god-awful, and Asami had a general look of being roughed up. She knew full well that she was making a very bad impression on the leaders of both her family and her country. Asami bent forward in a reverent bow, bending her body a full 90 degrees before pointing her face directly at the floor. Prime Minister Nakagawa began to speak. You asked your father, the Prince Ryobe, for permission to enlist in the Japanese armed forces. On account of your age and sex, he explicitly denied your request and said you were to stay home. Then you disobeyed him. Please forgive me. I have no excuse. Remember when I said that there are a very large number of ways to apologize in Japanese? Princess Asami was limiting herself to the more formal and serious range of words here. You ran away from home in the dead of night, Nakagawa continued. I created trouble for my family. I apologize, Asami did not dare look up. You created a false identity, the name Chiho Tatsuya, and used it to enlist in the Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force illegally. Forgive me. Asami was holding back tears. You flouted the law which prohibits people under the age of 18 from enlisting in the armed forces. The Prime Minister was raising his voice. Asami responded by getting down on her knees and hanging her head. There is no excuse. Please forgive me. Ryo Nakagawa was on the warpath now. He stood up, pointing an accusing finger at Asami. You abandoned your place in the Imperial Palace, deserted your nation, and neglected your duties to the Chrysanthemum throne, all to satisfy your own childish thirst for adventure and for the love of some gaijin. Princess Asami winced at Nakagawa's words. He had used the Japanese word for foreigner to describe myself, but he used it in a way that invoked its derogatory meaning. She was feeling a powerful swell of emotions. She was angry, terrified, and sorrowful. She knew what was about to happen, had guessed it from the moment she saw Nakagawa's note, and her guess was confirmed when she saw him watching her embrace on the steps outside of the building. She was shaking, about to cry and scream at the same time. All the princess could say was, I am so terribly sorry. Please have mercy on me. And then Prime Minister Nakagawa swung the metaphorical axe. Believe it or not, he actually did cut the princess a break. A very, very, very small one, but a break nonetheless. You have intentionally failed to uphold the honorable image of the imperial family, he seethed. You have become the farthest possible thing from a princess of Japan. You have no purity, no dignity, and no place here anymore. The Prime Minister uncapped an ink pen, scribbled a note onto a sheet of paper Asami couldn't see, and then slid the document across the table to the Emperor, who looked at it for a moment, taking in whatever Nakagawa wrote. Then he nodded and proceeded to stamp it with his personal seal. Then he passed it back to Nakagawa. He picked up the document and read aloud, By order of His Imperial Majesty, with the informed consent of the National Diet of Japan, you will be stripped of your royal name and status and ejected from the imperial family. Henceforth, you are neither welcome nor permitted within the bounds of any structure owned by the Emperor or his family. Furthermore, you are remanded to the 13th Artillery Company pending your arrest and trial to be scheduled and carried out after the conclusion of the current ongoing conflict. The nameless girl standing in the middle of the room was now shaking with barely suppressed rage. Prime Minister Nakagawa put the document down and pointed to the door. Get out. Miyoshi, Hiroshima Prefecture. On the eastern side of the town of Miyoshi, there is a place where 3 major roadways converge, including 2 national highways. It was here that the Soviet Red Army was massing for their planned assault on Hiroshima. T-90 battle tanks rolled off the highway ramp and parked themselves on the country road, while self-propelled artillery trucks were inspected by officers. Russian fighter jets soared overhead, while cargo trucks offloaded ammunition for a wide range of weapons, ranging from assault rifles all the way up to tank rounds. Some 50 BM-21 trucks were parked all over the area, spaced out to protect against retaliatory strikes. Each of these trucks carried a rocket artillery pod capable of firing up to 40 rockets at once, each one tipped with high explosive warheads. A trio of Soviet officers were walking up and down the highway, checking the artillery trucks one last time while talking into their radios. General, shouldn't we conserve some ammunition for the next fight? An officer said. General Artyom Sidorov shook his head. No matter what happens, Major, I am confident there will not be a next fight, Sidroth replied. This is the place where the war will end. Meanwhile, at the outermost edges of the Soviet perimeter, a group of Spetsnaz soldiers boarded an Mi-17 transport helicopter, and it quickly lifted off, staying low to the ground and moving at high speeds towards northern Hiroshima. National Highway 54, northbound, Akita Ward. My girlfriend and I were on the first transport truck back to the northern part of the city. I could tell she was liable to explode at any moment, so I didn't press her to tell me what happened. I could feel my cell phone buzzing like there was no tomorrow in my pocket, but I was ignoring it. All I could do for the first half hour of the ride was to just hold her, while she shook with what I initially thought was silent fury. Then, once we crossed the Ota River and left metropolitan Hiroshima behind, the former princess finally broke down in tears. Bit by bit, she told me the whole story, and I cried with her whenever words failed. Honestly, there was nothing I could have said to make her feel better. We were going through a grieving process, much the same as if a loved one had died. My girlfriend said she needed to take some time to build a new identity for herself, a permanent one. We agreed that I would talk to Captain Smith when we got back to base, and I would make sure everyone left the nameless girl alone for a few days. As our truck pulled up to the hillside drive near Kabe High School, we heard our driver say, "What the hell is that noise?" About 200 yards short of the school, the truck stopped. Our driver got out with us, and we all stood on the road listening to a noise unlike any other. During the Second Hyperspace War, the vast majority of combat occurred in space. Ground combat consisted mostly of small, squad-level actions, and combined arms pitched battles were rare. As a result, there are very few war veterans in the galaxy who can claim to have survived an artillery barrage. This is because very few of said barrages happened. Let me tell you what it's like to be caught in the largest artillery bombardment of World War III. At first, I thought there was an approaching thunderstorm. The air was filled with this deep rumbling that echoed off every one of the surrounding mountains. I looked around for clouds, but the sun was setting behind a mountain, and the first stars of the night were starting to come out. Then we heard a sound like a thunderclap. It was a great crash and a flash of light that shone through the trees and made my girlfriend and I jump. It wasn't the enemy. Not yet. One of the cannons in our own unit, 13th Artillery, had actually managed to return fire. That was the only one, though. The entire Japanese side only managed to fire one shell before the firestorm began. In the span of about 10 minutes, the Soviets fired around 30,000 rockets at Hiroshima. For those of us on the receiving end, it was 10 minutes of pure hell. The very first explosion caused me to go deaf. The second one threw several trees into the road and on top of our truck. I lost track of my girlfriend in the ensuing chaos, and then I lost track of everything else as well. Dirt and concrete and all sorts of other things flew above my head while I curled up into a ball and held onto my helmet with both hands. Beneath me, the ground heaved and shook as though the entire world was being tossed around in a game of handball. Each impact was so jarring that my bones hurt. I thought I was going to die. But then it stopped. It was over that quickly, but I was so frightened that it might start up again at any moment that I refused to stand. In reality, I was quite safe. The Soviets had started relocating their artillery immediately for fear of being hit by return fire. I think I stayed in the fetal position for a few minutes, until I felt someone pushing on my shoulder. Then, with one insanely painful pop, I felt a sharp pain in both of my ears, and my hearing came back. "Get up!" a voice was shouting. "Get up! They're coming!" It was Nanako Yamada, Akira Robinson. My family and friends spent several days in collective head-scratching over the Paradox's role in the November 9th bombardment of Hiroshima. We never did figure out what she was doing when the rockets started raining down. We couldn't even come up with a plausible theory. Whatever ideas we did come up with were easy to shoot down. She definitely did nothing to prevent it, and as far as we can tell, she was nowhere near either of Jericho's eventual parents when the bombardment actually happened. Regardless, Nanako pulled me back to my feet before moving off to help my nameless girlfriend. Looking around, I was shocked by how much of the landscape had changed in just a few minutes. The area surrounding us was turned into a hellish moonscape. Any tree that wasn't knocked over was on fire. Every building in the area was at least partially collapsed, windows blown out, and power lines dangling on the road. The truck we arrived in was flattened. And the body of our driver? Well, I won't share those details. Nanako practically dragged the two of us back into the school complex, weaving between the bent and twisted remains of two howitzers that took a direct hit. I could see Holly Smith on the roof of what had once been Kabe High School. She was shaking her fist in the air and screaming, "Try harder, you commie bastards! We're still here!" "What happened?" my girlfriend gasped. "What's going on?" "The traitors gave us away! The fucking Ruskies are coming!" Soylent shouted as he emerged from a shattered hallway. He passed a pair of rifles to me and my girlfriend. "Here, you're on your own for ammo." "Enemy helicopter just landed north of our position," Holly called from the roof. "The bastards are coming to finish the job." As the dust settled from the barrage, the soldiers of the 13th Artillery finally started to rally. All told, about 30 of the men and women who worked on the cannons were killed, including several gun commanders. Out of our 18 howitzers, 3 were destroyed and a further 5 were out of commission, leaving only 10 able to fire. While my girlfriend tried to find and take count of our friends, I looked around for Matteo. He'd been injured during the barrage, and I had trouble recognizing him because of how much blood was now covering his face, chest, and hands. "Soviet infantry coming up the hill!" Matteo gasped, leaning against a howitzer and reloading his rifle with his one good hand. "Robinson, we've got to get these guns out of here. If the Russians get them—" "I know," I finished. "I'll talk to Smith, see if we can rearguard you guys out of here." I ran as fast as I could up the ruined stairs to the roof, grabbed Captain Smith, and turned her around to show her the scene below. "Hernandez and his guys are going to hook up the cannons to the trucks and drive out of here," I told her. "We need to rearguard and stop the Russians getting to them." A manic look came over the captain's face. She smiled. "Oh, Robinson," Smith replied. "All you had to say was stop the Russians." Then she leaned over the railing and yelled, "Hernandez, get your guns and your men out of here. We'll cover your backs." Down on the ground, Matteo raised his good hand in salute, then pointed towards the howitzers that were too badly damaged to move, shouting to his men, "Put some thermite on those guns!" As for our little team, we set ourselves up in the school. We took up defensive positions in classrooms, throwing sandbags into the windows so we could mount our rifles in place. We had a good view to the north and the forest-covered hillside that lay in that direction, but none of us could spot where the enemy helicopter landed. Kotori Sato scanned the terrain several times through her rifle scope before saying, "Where are they?" As if in answer, the air came alive with gunfire. Loud snaps and pops and the tinkle of breaking glass told me that several bullets had just sailed over my head. I ducked down behind my sandbag fortification as Aaron shouted, "Spetsnaz! Spetsnaz coming from the tree line!" Up until now, we had only been fighting regular troops in the Soviet Red Army and the occasional grunts from the so-called People's Republic. The Spetsnaz were something else entirely. These men were elites. They carried the very latest in Soviet military weapons and equipment, and they were deadly. Several Japanese soldiers from the 13th were cut down in the first volley. The rest of us returned fire, sending as many bullets downrange as we could. Kotori pulled the pin on a hand grenade and threw it like she was a baseball pitcher, sending the little sphere into a clump of trees the enemy was using for cover. Anyone who wasn't killed by the explosion was finished off by a massive tree trunk crashing down on them. The enemy scattered, but I got the feeling they always intended to do that. "Watch the sides!" Hal shouted. "They're moving to flank us!" I broke from my position and ran into the staff room, determined to shoot down a few Russians as they moved around the far side of the school. From my vantage point, I saw what happened next. Spetsnaz soldiers charged around the side of the building, no doubt expecting to find the howitzers from the 13th Artillery. But instead, the enemy arrived just in time to see the last of Mateo's trucks driving away. The cannons were gone. Mateo himself and 5 of his soldiers were still there, putting thermite explosives on the few remaining artillery pieces that hadn't been able to move. Mateo saw the enemy coming, raised his middle finger at them, and yelled, "Hasta la vista, bastardos!" Boom! And then all of the thermite charges detonated. A white-hot, raging plume of flame erupted from the damaged guns. Hot, molten metal dripped to the ground, and the air was suddenly full of bullets. The Spetsnaz operators tried to gun down Mateo and his team, but I was covering them from the upper floor window. I emptied a whole magazine in less than 10 seconds, sending 4 Russians to the ground while Mateo scrambled for safety. Before I could reload and follow up, though, I heard the sounds of gunfire and a high-pitched scream behind me. "Blake, help me!" I turned around and sprinted back into the hallway, where I came upon a horrible scene. Hal McIntosh was lying face up on the floor, clutching his stomach and moaning in pain. I couldn't see any blood. Far down the hall, there were 2 Soviet soldiers, Spetsnaz, retreating toward the stairway. One of them was carrying my girlfriend over his shoulder. "Stop!" I shouted. The nameless former princess was screaming at the top of her lungs and beating her fists on the man's shoulder, and his companion spun around to face me when I yelled. I started to raise my rifle, but the enemy was faster. He aimed a shotgun directly at me and pulled the trigger. I felt like I was punched in the chest by a heavyweight boxing champion. I lost all momentum and crashed down to the floor. I pushed both of my hands to my chest, looking for the spot where I'd been hit, but I couldn't feel any blood. Or a hole, for that matter. "What the hell?" I cursed aloud. "Beanbag round," Hal gasped. "Get up! Grab your gun! They want to take prisoners!" No sooner were we back on our feet than 2 new Spetsnaz soldiers arrived. They burst out of the stairwell door with what looked like either smoke bombs or gas grenades in their hands. I could see they both had shotguns dangling from loops on their belts, the special kind that could fire rubber bullets or beanbag rounds. Hal and I both raised our weapons and opened fire, causing both men to fall backwards into the staircase, their explosives detonating on the way down. The stairway filled up with a foul-smelling yellow smoke, forcing us to take a detour. Hal and I ran into the other side of the building, then down a stairwell, and finally burst through a smashed window and got outside. By the time we saw the helicopter, it was too late. The Russians must have been waiting to see if their last 2 men were going to come back from the school building. When 2 Americans emerged, the Mi-17 seemed to leap off the ground like a bird taking flight, its rotors thundering loudly in the dark sky. I lost all control. I was furious and pretty much blinded by rage. I raised my rifle and took aim at the retreating chopper, only for Hal to grab my arm and stop me. "Wait! Our people are in that thing!" I was forced to watch, seething as the Soviet chopper vanished behind a mountain with my girlfriend on board. But from there, things only got worse. In the calm that followed, our squad came back together and started trying to assess the damage and collect the bodies. 2 members of our team were dead. Mateo Hernandez got in a truck and sped away with the remainder of our artillery pieces, but before the medics could treat his wounds, he bled to death in the back seat. I was told that before he passed out for the final time, he asked about me. He wanted to know if I was okay. He never got an answer. No one knows exactly how Asuna Tachibana was killed. We found her body in the wreckage of the school, riddled with bullets and surrounded by both shell casings and dead Russians. She went down in a literal blaze of glory. It got worse. Some of us were taken. During the chaos and confusion of battle, Kotori Sato, Kate Newbury, Chihiro Iwasaki, Nanako Yamada, and the nameless former princess were all captured. 5 men from the 13th Artillery were also grabbed. 3 gunners, an ammo handler, and a crew commander. In total, 10 of our comrades were spirited away in that helicopter. I lost her. Again. I could have just laid down and died from despair in that very moment. But I didn't. I was being powered by pure rage now. As the sun set over Japan that night, I felt like I could have taken on the entire Soviet Union by myself and laid waste to their whole damn country.